Today's video is brought to you by Vinyl Moon. Vinyl Moon is the all-in-one deluxe vinyl discovery. Every month they press awesome music on beautiful colored records and send them right to your door. Join today with discount code Vinyl Eyezz to get 10% off. Alright, now today we're talking about the most famous band of all time, the Beatles. Hey friends, welcome back. So today we're doing something completely new on the channel. This is the first episode of a series called Behind the Band. This is where we explore the roots of popular music, learn a lot of interesting facts, and basically find out how the band became so successful in the first place. So we're starting off with the Beatles, and although I am by no means an expert, I did do some research and I want to share with you guys what I found. Also, if you have a band I should cover in the future, drop it in the comments down below. Alright, so before we dive in, today's song of the day is Penny Lane by, of course, the Beatles. And if you have a suggestion for a song of the day as well, post that down below too, and you might see it in a future video. Okay, so here's how the Beatles got started. John Lennon was born on October 9th, 1940 in Liverpool, England, and after experiencing a difficult childhood which led to the separation of his parents, he found that he was naturally drawn to the arts, and in particular he had an affinity for music. In fact, it was his mother Julia, who was very much a free spirit in her own right, who encouraged John's musical pursuits by playing Elvis Presley records for him and also teaching him how to play the banjo. So in 1956, when he was 15 years old, he started a band called the Quarrymen after his high school, which was named the Quarry Bank High School. Today, the same school is known as the Calderstone School, but I think the Quarry sounded cooler. But anyways, the next year at the band's second official performance, John met a 15-year-old named Paul McCartney who was also from Liverpool and also into music. So he was invited to join them as rhythm guitarist, and he naturally accepted. The following year, in 1958, the group held auditions for a lead guitarist, and although a young musician named George Harrison caught their attention, they felt that maybe this kid was too young. He was 14 at the time. However, after a second audition, he finally won them over, and they agreed to let him join the band as well. Over the next few years, John Lennon's Quarry Bank High School friends left the group, and the band basically became just John, Paul, and George. And the three of them played at clubs whenever they could find a drummer. Now in 1960, Stuart Sutcliffe, who was John's friend from art school, played bass with the band very briefly, but by the following year, and after some creative differences, he decided to leave the group to pursue his painting. So finally, by 1962, they had John Lennon on lead vocals and rhythm guitar, Paul McCartney on bass, and George Harrison on lead guitar. But the band still needed to find a drummer. And at first they chose Pete Best, who belonged to a different band that had recently broken up, but then later on they decided that Ringo Starr, an English musician they had met while on tour in Hamburg, would be a better fit for the band. So, they finally had their band, but now they had to decide on a name. They felt that the Quarrymen no longer fit, and they wanted something similar to what Buddy Holly had done with his band, the Crickets. You know, on one hand, it's a little grasshopper, but it's also a game in England. So this idea of double meaning kind of stayed with them. At first, they went with the Beatles, spelt this way. Then in Hamburg, the Silver Beatles. Then John changed it to the Beatles, spelt this way because it had the word beat in it, and finally they settled on the Beatles, spelt this way. As John Lennon remarked, quote, "When you said it, people thought of crawly things, and when you read it, it was beat music." Now, as far as their music is concerned, their first band, the Quarrymen, played skiffle music, which was a style that blended jazz, blues, and folk music together. And even though they walked away from that band and became the Beatles, they still kept their skiffle roots, but also branched out into other genres as well, such as British beat, classical, psychedelic rock, pop, and even Indian music. So although their official genre was rock and roll, they liked to experiment and play around with other concepts. Basically, you can't put them in a box because their sound is so different. And I think that's why people liked them at the time. They were new and they were fresh and didn't sound like anyone else out there. And the people were ready for a change. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure there was some great polka bands around during that time, but the people wanted rock. They wanted something with an edge, something wild. They wanted Little Richard, the Rolling Stones, they wanted the Animals, the Yardbirds, and they wanted the Beatles. Now, as far as the Beatles' musical influences go, John Lennon and Paul McCartney were both big fans of Buddy Holly. They liked him not only because he wrote original material, but also because he could play the guitar very well and sing on stage at the same time. Unlike Elvis, who, according to John Lennon, was, quote, more of a singer than a guitar player, who wore the guitar better than he played it. A little shade there against the king, but that's okay. Now, do you remember Stuart Sutcliffe, their former bass player who left the band in 1961? Well, before that, he was dating a photographer named Astrid Kirchherr, who he had met in Hamburg while the band was on tour. And she is the one who's often credited as inventing the Beatles' early look with their signature mop-top haircuts. And she was also one of the first photographers to take high-quality photos of the band before they were officially famous. So here's a couple of her really cool photos. And these are like the earliest ones in Beatles history. Now, in addition to their mop tops, the band also embraced a certain style in how they dressed. In the early days, they wore leather jackets and kind of looked like greasers, but over time, they ditched that in favor of suits and ties, and that seemed to fit their image much better. Basically, Paul wanted them to wear matching outfits because then they'd sort of look like a team, and that would help to establish them as a brand. Similar to what a lot of bands do today. In fact, if you think about it, the Beatles might have been one of the first boy bands in rock and roll history, and they were around long before those 90s bands. I mean, totally different music, but yeah, never thought I'd make that comparison. Now, after a few years of playing at different clubs, most notably the Cavern Club, where they met their manager, Brian Epstein, their popularity really took off in 1963. During that year, they released several hit singles that people just could not get enough of. Songs like Please Please Me, From Me to You, and She Loves You were released during this time, and the fan frenzy that followed was labeled by the press as Beatlemania, with the band members themselves being called the Fab Four. So the world was definitely starting to take notice. They also released the song I Wanna Hold Your Hand the very next year in 1964, and it also became an instant classic as well. Now, their first live performance in front of an American audience happened on February 9th, 1964, on The Ed Sullivan Show. And in addition to many screaming girls in the audience, 73 million people were watching the performance from their homes. And it was basically like the Super Bowl moment of its time. It was a huge deal for the band. And it also kicked off this whole British invasion of UK bands coming into the American market. And not only that, but because the US had never seen anything like this band before, the Beatles immediately became pop culture icons. All the kids wanted to dress like them and get their haircut like them too. So they were kind of trendsetters of their time. Now, after that first performance, they did a short US tour where they held shows at the Washington Coliseum and Carnegie Hall, and then 1 week after that legendary performance on Ed Sullivan, they went back to the show and did another concert, and 70 million people watched that one as well. So they got great exposure. Now, over the next several years, the band went on to perform at countless other venues and locations around the world, including a 4-year period where they held over 1,400 concert appearances internationally, which is insane. I don't know how they survived. Now, speaking of their music, over the course of their successful career, they released dozens of albums in international markets. So, not counting their live albums, EPs, or compilation records, here's a list of their official studio albums. Please Please Me, With the Beatles, Introducing the Beatles, Meet the Beatles, Twist and Shout, The Beatles, Long Tall Sally, A Hard Day's Night, Something New, Beatles for Sale, Beatles 65, Beatles 6, Help, Rubber Soul, Yesterday and Today, Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Magical Mystery Tour, The Beatles, also known as the White Album, Yellow Submarine, Abbey Road, and finally, Let It Be. Now, it wasn't all sunshine and roses, though. Over the years, the band did have their setbacks. 1966, in particular, was a year that was not very kind to the Beatles. Their longtime manager, Brian Epstein, passed away. John Lennon made a comment during an interview that the Beatles were, quote, more popular than Jesus, which did not go over well with Christians around the world. And even though they issued a formal apology for that comment, there were still riots at the time. And also, their live performances were descending into a bit of a circus. So, fearing for their safety, they just stopped touring altogether. Basically, they were pretty exhausted by this point with the riots and all the constant touring, and they figured that they should just be a studio band, and that would kind of allow them to focus more on the music itself. Also, in 1966, the cover of their album Yesterday and Today featured a bizarre photo of doll parts and raw meat. This has been called the Butcher cover. The infamous photo was taken by photographer Robert Whitaker, and basically the band was trying to make a statement about the Vietnam War and the fact that these large record labels kept butchering their music by rearranging the track orders of albums for international distributors. But either way, no matter what they were going for, people just didn't really get it, and it didn't go over well. The following year, in 1967, the band recorded their single Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and many people who were reported as being like totally square man thought that they were referring to, you know, something else. So this created a slight media controversy at the time. The following year, in 1968, Ringo Starr actually quit the group when they basically told him his drumming sucked when they were recording the White Album. But then they ended up making amends, and he came back to the studio to find his drum set covered with flowers, which was basically their way of saying they were sorry. His drumming did not suck. Now, considering all of this drama, the biggest question many people still have to this day is, did Yoko ruin the band? And the short answer is no. But she didn't exactly help the situation either. Let me explain. So during this time when they were having all these setbacks, John Lennon had met Yoko Ono, fell in love with her, and basically he was spending a lot of time with her, which the other Beatles band members didn't like. They felt that he should be more focused on the music that they were making, and there was sort of this growing resentment there, which was definitely not healthy for the band. So all of this came to a head on September 20th, 1969, when John, the guy who had started this whole thing 13 years earlier, announced to the band, his wife, and his manager that he was leaving the Beatles. Kind of a bombshell. I guess he was just creatively frustrated and tired and felt that the band had run its course, even though the sales of Abbey Road were still doing really great at that time. I think ultimately he just wanted a change of pace. So although the Beatles broke up unofficially in 1969, years later in 1975, when the courts actually dissolved the group, that's when they broke up officially and legally. And as far as the biggest tragedy of all, John Lennon's magnificent candle faded out on December 8th, 1980 in Manhattan, when his life's journey was cut short by a deranged fan. And after his passing, the Beatles and the world just weren't the same. Now, regardless of all of this, the fact that we're still talking about the Beatles and their records are still being pressed to this day really says a lot. I mean, this band has basically stood the test of time. Now, as far as the Beatles records in my collection, I have 1. Hey Jude, Yellow Submarine, The Beatles, aka the White Album, Love, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and Abbey Road. So I've listed those records and their other top albums that you can get on vinyl in the video description down below. Also, speaking of records, I'd like to show y'all a really cool record that we got from our sponsor, Vinyl Moon, a while back. So this is volume 43 and it's called Electric Days. As you can see, it's on translucent blue colored vinyl with a red stripe through the middle, which looks really cool. All the artwork on this particular release was designed by Luc Pelletier, but overall each volume in their catalog is designed by a different artist. So basically no two records are going to look the same. And of course the music itself is also really awesome. So as I said earlier, if you guys want to check them out, their link will be down below. Now here's a few interesting facts you may not know about the Beatles. Some of their early band names included Beatles, Silver Beatles, Beatles, and even Johnny and the Moondogs, with Johnny being John Lennon. Paul McCartney once got arrested in Germany and deported back to the UK after he set a small fire in a club in Hamburg. George Harrison learned how to play sitar with Ravi Shankar. 40 years to the day after John met Paul at St. Peter's Church, the original Quarrymen, consisting of the earliest members of that band, reformed and are still playing music apparently to this day. And although their website definitely needs an update, it's kinda cool that they're still around. The fifth Beatle was a title that the press applied to people who were, at one time or another, part of the Beatles' entourage. And no one seems to really agree on who the real fifth Beatle was, but a lot of people seem to think it was Stuart Sutcliffe, the bass player. In 1966, when things were kind of winding down for the band, George Harrison found a deeper connection with Hinduism, meditation, and Eastern religious leaders, and kind of became less interested in the Beatles. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2001 due to lung cancer. Now, although John and George are no longer with us, Paul McCartney is 77 and still making music, and Ringo Starr is 79 and still making music. So that's pretty cool. The Beatles, as a whole, are the best-selling music act of all time. They've sold over 600 million records, tapes, and CDs worldwide, with over 183 million units in the US alone. They had 6 diamond albums, which sold over 10 million copies each, 20 multi-platinum albums, 16 platinum albums, and 6 gold albums over the course of their career. They founded their own record company called Apple Records, which is now a multimedia corporation that continues to oversee the band's legacy. They hold the record for the most #1 hits on the Billboard 100 chart and most singles sold in the UK. They've been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, both as a band and individually. They've won 7 Grammy Awards, 4 Brit Awards, and an Academy Award for Best Original Score for the 1970 documentary Let It Be. They've spawned countless side projects and other bands such as Paul McCartney and Wings, Plastic Ono Band, Traveling Wilburys, and Ringo Starr and his all-star band. Star spelt with 2 R's. Also, John Lennon's song Imagine, which he's best known for, has become the signature song played every New Year's Eve in Times Square since 2005. And finally, Time magazine named them among the 20th century's 100 most important people. So you could say they've made their mark on the world. Now there's a ton of other stuff I didn't talk about in this video because it would have been 4 hours long and maybe 3 people would watch it, but hopefully now we at least know a little bit more about this incredible band and the impact that they've had on our modern music. So what do you think about the Beatles? Let us know down in the comments below, and if you love music in general, feel free to smack this red subscribe button right here and hit the bell notifications so you won't miss out on the new videos. And most importantly of all, friends, have a fantastic day and keep spinning that vinyl.